Welcome to another episode of Conversations with the Co-op. Today I am speaking with our illustrious Mr. Jim Kath again, our behavior consultant for the Paul Bunyan Education Cooperative. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Jeff. Thanks for asking.
Wonderful. Today I asked Jim here to talk a little bit about kind of on-the-fly teaching social skills in the moment type of thing. So, Jim, can you tell us a little bit about maybe potential drawbacks to relying solely on in-the-moment teaching for addressing those challenging behaviors in the classroom?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, for having me on. I think anytime we look at like kind of in-the-moment teaching, it's not that in-the-moment teaching is bad in and of itself. It's just that, like you said, it can't be the primary way that I'm going to be providing social skills teaching for kids. And the two biggest reasons why is that, number one, is there's absolutely no research and there's no literature base to support that as an effective way for teaching kids specific social skills and increasing their skills in those areas, right? So anytime we're looking at kind of services and stuff that we're providing for students, it has to be that it's an effective research-based intervention before we would try to do any of those kind of things. So there's not a research base, there's not a literature base to support the use of quote-unquote in-the-moment social skills teaching as the main way of teaching social skills, right? The other big drawback for it is that it's always by nature reactive. So what it requires is for the kid to do something wrong first, right, the inappropriate behavior, and then in that moment, I'm going to teach them what the appropriate behaviors to do. So again, it's not that that's a bad thing to do. Anytime that we have a kid that engages in the inappropriate behavior, we should take the time to go back, practice what the skills that you should have done, maybe done some, kind of positive teaching in those moments. Those are good things to do. That just can't be the primary curriculum or service that I'm providing for students. So those are the two biggest kind of drawbacks that come to mind.
Well, I think it feels good in the moment because I can see the effectiveness of what I'm doing in the moment, and it really makes me feel like this is effective. As opposed to I teach a class and the kids maybe are a little bit bored with it, or you can regurgitate the stuff and I'm like,
yep.
And then they turn around, walk out the class and show the behavior that we were just working on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's one of those things, and that's where it kind of comes down to too, is that sometimes, even when you're doing in-the-moment teaching, the kid can already have the skill in their repertoire. Right, so like if the kid doesn't, and when I point out afterwards and say, "Oh man, what could you have done instead?" The kid can recite back to me what they should have done and said. We practice it and they do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that in the moment they're going to have the ability to identify kind of some of those antecedent events and triggers that are going on with them, and then be able to perform that skill in real time. So that's so there has to be programming in that aspect of it as well.
Right. So what kind of strategies would you suggest for planning and setting up lessons and activities to kind of address those challenging behaviors rather than just relying on that on-the-fly type of teaching?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think, part of the deal right away is that it is helpful to have some type of a curriculum that you're following, right? I mean, I think that's always helpful as a teacher. I might have limited planning time, whatever that is. So having a general kind of curriculum that I'm following can be a helpful thing, but going back to, looking at what effective research shows us is that like just doing a lesson on it, just talking about a behavior, doing a worksheet, watching a video doesn't actually have a high likelihood of actually generalizing to perform that skill in real time, right? So there's kind of certain aspects that we have to have with that. I do think that like on-the-fly teaching, social skills training can be maybe more of an effective, rather than to think of it as a teaching strategy, but to look at it as an observation strategy, right? So if I see a kid that in the lunchroom is regularly having a difficulty standing in line and they're physically inappropriate with kids around them, I don't want to deal with that each time after that behavior occurs, right? I know that that's a difficult time for them. So we're going to actually set up lessons about what does it mean to be appropriate in line. The kids can do that. And then we're going to go into the second key component with social skills training, and that's role playing, right? So I have to have these opportunities where I'm actually trying to practice the skill that I need for them to do, right? So if I'm a sports person, and, we've talked about before, like the example of basketball, I can tell you all the mechanical things I need to do in order to shoot a free throw correctly. Right? But that doesn't mean that that's going to necessarily generalize to me being able to physically do that in that time. And then more so in real time in a game situation, the likelihood of me reading something then to be able to perform a totally different skill almost in that real time is really dramatically decreased. So we use that as an example that is a really powerful way to kind of look at when we talk about social skills training. It's complex, right? It's you're looking at multiple things for a kid to be able to observe inside of a social environment and to be able to go, what are these kind of things that are going on inside this environment, to maybe have some kind of self-awareness of what's going on with them, and then to be able to socially read what's the appropriate way to act in a certain situation. So it's a complex thing to do, and it requires some complex kind of teaching strategies around it. So using that kind of thing is like in the moment teaching as a way to observe and say, hey, these are some of the things that the kid is having difficulty with. How do I then go back and teach what those skills are? So I might go back to like a task analysis. First, I'm going to look at the student that I'm having a difficulty with. Next, I'm going to say, I really don't like it when you're acting that way. Can you please step away from me? And if the person doesn't move away, then I'm going to take the next step and I'm going to ignore the behavior. I'm going to remove. I'm going to go talk to an adult, whatever that is. So I'm going to task analyze what that skill is, and then I'm going to directly teach that specific skill for that kid. Obviously, as kids get into middle school and high school, the roteness of that might go away a little bit, but still they have to have those specific things of being able to know what the skill is, teach specifically what the skill is, role play that, and then we set up more and more pseudo environments, or really just environments that replicate what it is that's going to happen in the real time, right? So if I'm practicing shooting free throws, first we talk about the mechanics of it, then I practice it by myself. I'm going through these kind of things. I do this over and over and over again. Then I have people around me and I'm shooting it. Then the people around me are waving their hands and screaming. And then hopefully in a real life situation, I'm going to be able to replicate that same behavior under those kind of things. Right. So, there's a lot that goes into it.
Well, I think it's not any different than teaching any other skill, but sometimes we think about it as being a little bit different, right? When I teach a reading skill, I have a reading class. We practice this in isolation. We practice it together. We practice it this way. Sports, I practice the different skills necessary to do it prior to a game. But for some reason, it feels better sometimes with behavior to do it in the moment. But really, it's no different when we're talking skill-wise.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, we wouldn't go with our main reading curriculum to wait till a kid missays a word, then go back, have them say that correctly for us, and that wouldn't be the only way that we would teach reading, right? So we want to teach them what those specific skills are there. And I think, you hit the nail on the head. I think with social skills, it's just one of those deals that we haven't really thought about kind of what are those specific things that kids need to have. And as we've come as maybe in the education system, we kind of look at social emotional learning and some of those other opportunities that we have right now, different curriculums and stuff are out there, is that we're kind of catching up a little bit of, helping teachers to develop a little bit more of a scope and sequence of those kind of things. And what the research is showing for us right now, and at least in the last decade, is that actually teaching a lot of the social emotional learning skills to kids, guess what it actually increases? Their academic performance, right? So when we know that when we spend the time, we concretely go over and really work on what are these good things to be able to work with other people. How do I, what are conflict resolution skills? How do I join groups? And I work on these kind of core basic socialization skills, is that actually increases my performance academically too. And there's probably a couple of reasons why we're not dealing with the inappropriate behaviors in the first place, right? But it's also that the kid has success. They're not at an elevated level. I'm not, like if I'm a zones of regulation guy, I'm not at a yellow level. I'm at a green level. I'm keeping myself in place, and I'm in a much more teachable state. So it's a good investment.
Well, and I think that kind of brings up a really good point too, is we're a little reluctant to pull kids out of their academics to teach these social skills. But in reality, when we're having to do it in the moment, on the fly, they're not engaged in those academics anyway. They're missing large chunks of their time. And it actually is less effective for us because we're doing one student at a time for that period, as opposed to be able to group students that maybe are struggling with the same skill,
right?
Pull them out for a prescribed amount of time, and then get them back to their classes. Right?
Yeah, for sure. And if we see like a consistent thing across multiple students of similar types of behaviors that kids are struggling with, then we want to have designated times to work on those, because it's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to be effective in those environments that they're going to go into in the future. So no, it's a good time investment. It's just we need to look at social skills teaching the way that we would look at any other type of teaching that we would do, whether it's reading, math, science, social studies, a sport. It's the same basic process.
Yeah. Kind of one final question for you here. I'm kind of a big data guy myself, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how important is it to collect and analyze data as we're addressing these challenging behaviors in the classroom? And how do you use that data to, inform you for your teaching strategies?
Yeah. I mean, I think data, for whatever it is, you can say that's only important if you want to know if what you're doing is effective or not. right? Which I think is pretty important, right? Right. We want to, data is really about efficiency. And I think that people get scared off so often. It's like, oh my gosh, now I got to keep data on this or whatever. But data is really about efficiency. It's making sure that I'm not wasting time doing things that aren't doing what I need for them to do, right? So in looking at social skills, I'll say specific to social skills, some of the, suggestions that I give to people is like, have your data replicate the training that you're providing for your students, right? So if we're going to work on the skill of joining a group, or we're going to work on the skill of basic conflict resolution with other students or other adults, is that I'm going to say, can the student list the basic steps for doing those kind of things? That's kind of a precursor skill, right? So that initial skill, the same as if I was teaching reading, I want for them to be able to give me the phonetic sound of each one of these letters and identify that, right? And then in reading, the next thing you'd be doing is looking at kind of blending those skills. So in social skills, maybe what I'm thinking about is now I can list those out. Now in a role play situation, the student is able to take those steps and perform those steps, right? So that might be how I write my goals and how I'm keeping data. 4 out of 5 times, given a social skills environment, right, Jeff is going to be able to engage in this skill in a role play situation. Boom, so I keep data on that and it's there. And I can see, yep, he's got that skill now, he's able to role play it. Now I'm going to try to set that up into more and more of a real-time situation, so some kind of a pseudo environment. And then, the real-time environments, those are the harder ones to do that because obviously we don't have somebody following a kid around all day going, and we write dumb goals sometimes. We write like, well, given 10 opportunities, the kid will do it 80% of the time. Well, nobody's actually keeping track of how many opportunities the kid has.
Am I going to poke the bear enough times to actually see him do this?
Right? So it ends up being kind of like that. It's a fake data thing that we just put out there just to put a number on it. And we want it to be useful for us. So, so we set it up in that pseudo environment. So the last thing I might look at is I might look at like my point sheet data. That might be a point that I'm looking at, like how many instances of kind of these more major behaviors does a kid have? Right. And as a result of social skills teaching, do we see a decrease in the frequency of those behaviors? When we address that, is he able to take feedback from somebody and not turn it into a bigger deal?
Right.
So we're looking at those kind of things. And again, I think it's more about, it's just taking the time to really kind of task analyze and think, well, how would I measure that? And we're not maybe always programmed as well compared to reading, writing, and math as to kind of know what that scope and sequence is.
Well, and I think when we're looking at collecting data and we're looking at goal data, they don't always have to be exactly the same, right? Like when we're really progress monitoring, we're just looking for something that's telling us whether or not the progress we're making on that goal is effective, right? So it doesn't have to be this many opportunities out of this. If we have something that we want to see reduced or increased, we can use that kind of as that measuring tool. So looking at how many incidents there are typically in a year, and if those are reduced, well, there's probably a high likelihood that our training or our skills training is effective.
Right, and is related to that change that we see.
Right.
That it's not to this outside variable. And, and our job in school is not to get into clinical research, right? We're not looking at specific other confounding variables or those kind of things that might be related to it. But it is for us to be able to say, like, we want to, with a high amount of predictability or reliability, to be able to say, yeah, as a result of us doing this thing in social skills training, we're seeing this change in this other area there, and we're going to be able, there's a correlation between those two things, and we know that this is an effective way for us to address some of those kind of things. So,
like we've talked in the past about, does the teacher notice a change in behavior, right? Just that teacher rating. What percent of the time do you think the student is doing this? It's not an exact science, but if that teacher believes throughout the year that the behavior has improved, then there's probably that increase that skills work is effective.
Is an effective way and when we write our goals, that's what we say. Such and such. Give this student in this type of an environment will change from this to this, given this intervention. Right, and I think in goals sometimes we actually put in dates there where we mess up, and we're actually supposed to put the intervention using social skills teaching and positive praise statements, or whatever the case is of the intervention that we're using. And then those objectives is when we kind of put those dates on it, going from here to here in this amount of time. So. I think that data is essential, right? We need to do those kind of things in order to have that. And again, like we're always happy, I think, from a co-op standpoint or those kind of things, when we're looking at IEP development, when we're looking at evaluation, kind of how do we do that? I'm always happy to sit down with people and look at like what are the measures that we have in place currently to get an idea of how often this behavior is occurring, and then what can we put in place so that you have an effective system for addressing these kind of things. And we're not writing it, you shouldn't write 20 different social skills goals for 20 different kids. Right. They should be pretty similar to those ones, and we have some type of the same as we have reading goals that are pretty similar. What are the basic skills we want for kids to do?
Right. Well, Jim, I know we could talk about this for all day long, but I think I'm going to kind of wrap it up for right now. Thank you so much for all your insights today. And thanks for everyone for listening to this, and hope that you found this conversation informative and useful. If you have any questions or comments, I know Jim's available, I'm available, please reach out to us. So until next time, take care.